I'm Nathaniel Kiwi, the Brand and Creative Director here at LiveTiles, and it's my pleasure today to introduce an amazing woman who helms one of the oldest and most respected female brands in Australia, one with a very long heritage and legacy. Names like Kerry Packer and Ida Buttrose spring to mind. I am speaking, of course, of the Australian Women's Weekly. So with legacy such as the weeklies, how do you refresh and revolutionise a brand with so much loyalty? And how do you do it in COVID? And how do you do it as a working mother? Well, my guest has not only done that, she's brought nostalgia. She's also brought modernity to the masthead. I am speaking, of course, of the very wonderful Nicole Byers.
Thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
It's all deserved. So how do you just do it all?
I think anyone that is a working mum knows that you don't really do it all. You kind of do bits of it and you do the best you can. You've got to love what you do. You got to love your job, because otherwise you wouldn't take that time away from your family. And you have to have a very supportive network of people around you and a great team.
You know, you speak about your family, you speak about your team. And I think one of the key things with our earlier chat was around collaboration. I'd like to actually go right back to the beginning. So what actually drew you to journalism, and did you always see, the pinnacle of Australian publishing as the editor-in-chief? Was that the goal, or what was your inspiration?
Yeah, I was one of those kids that really loved reading, really loved writing stories from a very young age. And to be honest, at school and in all my studies, writing was really the only thing that I kind of shone at. So I knew it had to be something in that world. And I did love magazines. I was a big magazine reader. I did my work experience at Dolly magazine, which shows my age a little, but was a big fan of Dolly. I spent my time opening Dolly Doctor letters, which, if anyone remembers Dolly, that was a very salacious part of the job. And I fell in love with with that office environment of the cut and thrust of stories and newsrooms. My first job was at the Australian newspaper, so I was around that journalism when the printing presses were still rattling in the bottom of the building. And, it was a very exciting career. And I guess as a woman working at Dolly, seeing Marina Go, who was the editor at the time, she was early 20s, and she was running this huge team of people, striding around looking fabulous. And I just thought, I just knew that's where I wanted to be. And I could never have imagined I'd end up where I have today, but very grateful that I did.
I'm interested to know, being a woman in a very male-driven world, what changes have you seen in publishing from that perspective as a woman?
Well, it's interesting publishing because it's always been quite a female industry. So I guess I've always had a lot of really strong female role models around me and in my industry, which has been great. I guess, the higher up you go, you realize that female leadership stops at a certain, there is that ceiling. And I guess, when you get to the executives and boards, it becomes quite male. So that was a really eye-opening experience, I guess. Always having been around strong females and then realizing there's still a need for us to push on to that next level, which I think is true of many industries. I think as a woman, that digital revolution has helped and hindered the industry in so many ways. The process of putting together a magazine is so much easier now than it used to be. But then the competition from digital's, entertainment and the immediacy of digital mediums has also been a challenge. So it's been a really double-edged sword, but it's been a time of incredible change in this industry, like so many. And it's exciting. It keeps it really fresh, and it keeps you having to innovate in ways perhaps previous editors of the weekly didn't have to pre-digital explosion.
Yeah, so do you think, in terms of, being prepared for all this upheaval, understanding that you just by virtue of being in publishing, that you guys were better prepared for this? Or
it's hard to say. I feel as an industry we probably began the process being quite stoic and believing that people were always going to want print products, and I think they always will. There's always going to be a part of the population, I believe, that wants something tangible in their hands in terms of a newspaper or a magazine. But I guess we pretty quickly came to terms with the fact we couldn't just stick in that lane. We had to meet our readers at every platform that they were going to want to consume that information on. So that maybe came a little slower, but when it came really strongly. So I think the last kind of period has probably been better for magazines and for formally print publications in general, that we've really come into our own now with that cross-platform story, and it's just made it so much stronger.
Yeah, I noticed, like, a lot of the, I suppose, integrated campaigns you do are now, with television and, other, I suppose, inventive ways to kind of collaborate. What, like, in terms of those kinds of things, I'd never seen before last year. You were on television, which is lovely, but explain, like, how that came about, and obviously that's part of the, the adaptation to that. How did those things come about?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. That was obviously we've got a lot of close relationships with the networks because we feature a lot of their talent on and in our magazine. So conversations began with Channel 10, and they were big lovers of the brand, and they understood that, that nostalgia and history that the Weekly has, that we thought they could really capture a great TV show. So bringing the magazine to life on TV sounds like a very obvious thing to do, but actually wasn't something that had been done for quite some time. And I think, it really surprised and delighted us how much people really appreciated seeing that, magazine come to life. We're not the most polished TV stars. I certainly didn't go into this to be on TV, and it was a little bit daunting. And our food editor's the same. She's in a test kitchen creating these delicious and amazing menus and food, but then to be thrust onto television was, it was a big experience for her. But I think the readers really responded to seeing us in a different way, and seeing their favourite magazine on TV. So hence we've done it a few more times now, and we're looking forward to the next TV shows coming out actually in early December.
Amazing. So I suppose just on that, like, the role of editor-in-chief kind of comes with that, public, you're in the public eye. And how is that, like, for you? I know you're a pretty private person, so how is that, being part of the job? Yeah,
it is a part of the job, and I must say, when I first was talking about taking on the role of the Weekly, it was something that I really had to think about, because I am not a massively public person. I don't like to put my life out in the public as much as perhaps other editors do. So I did have to think about that. But I remember someone very wise saying to me, you don't have to be a replica of a successful editor in the past. Thankfully, you can be your own sort of editor, and you can give parts of yourself that you're comfortable with, and you can do it in a way that's unique to you. I think the worst thing you can do as a leader or an editor is to try to replicate another editor, because you're always going to fail at that. What you're not going to fail at is being yourself. And coming back to the brand values of the title, which is authenticity, I was like, if I'm authentic to myself and I do what I think is the right level of public appearances for myself, then I will be comfortable with that, and I'll be able to continue. And so far, it's been successful. So
the two kind of brand values or company values you're talking about, which are authenticity and trust, and I love that that's come from. Am I right in thinking that's Ita Butterose who gave you that advice?
Well, I remember Ita. Obviously that's the name you think of when you're offered this role. You think, oh, how can I follow in Ita's footsteps? She's so fabulous. And I remember when I first met her as editor of the Weekly, she grabbed my hand and said, with this role comes great responsibility. And what she meant by that is, it's a power to have, that many readers and to be a voice for Australian women, and you need to use it in a way that is, steering, I guess, womankind in the right direction and bringing women together. And, she's been a really great support to me in terms of, sharing her challenges that she had along the way. I think everyone sees the successes of an Ita, but she's very generous in telling me about things that perhaps challenged her early on in her editorship at the Weekly. And that just gave me great strength to know, we both share those challenges, and, very different challenges that we face today that she faced in her time, but still that, confidence and, making sure you're on the right path, because it is a huge brand and you don't want to be the editor that leads the Weekly off in the wrong direction. But as long as you, take that responsibility seriously, I think you can create great things.
You can kind of see that through everything that you do. So with the, Women of the Future, you had Tanya Plibersek and Julie Bishop as part of the panel. Was that a conscious decision to select those kinds of people?
We weren't particularly trying to choose two people that, came from different sides of politics as such, but we do try, when we're selecting judges, because it's such an important campaign for us, we do try to get a cross-section. I guess, we want to be trying to reflect as much of an Australian view from ages and, I guess, political ideals. So it did make sense to have these two women. And I do remember thinking, it's a very intimate judging panel, so there's usually about 6 or 7 judges, and we sit down over a lunch for 4 or 5 hours and very robustly debate the different finalists. So I thought, this could be interesting, not having a really clear insight into these women's history and whether they did have a long rivalry. But they were incredibly generous. They were both really happy to be in that room together and in the process together. And, it sounds kind of cheesy, but I guess the, uplifting spirit of these finalists, these young women who are doing amazing things, it just kind of is a great leveler for everyone in the room. And we knew that we were there for things bigger than political tit for tat or debating. So yeah, it was really great to see those women come together. And in fact, the conversation sparked in that room around, bipartisan support of females in politics and across all different, I guess, industries, how important that is. And from that, we have been talking about trying to do an event where we bring together not only, young women that are potential future leaders with, women in politics from all sides, and bringing them together to show that support and solidarity, because I think it's really important. I think we've seen some, bad behaviour come out of politics in Canberra recently, and the spotlight's been shone on how difficult it can be for women in that particular industry. And I think it would be really great if we could have more of this bipartisan support for women. I think it can only strengthen in the future for all of us.
And can you explain, I think on that theme as well, is that idea of coming together and putting differences aside, the story with New Idea on Women's Day?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. I think one of the great, it's lots of great characters in publishing over the years, and one of the great rivalries, of course, was Women's Day magazine and New Idea, the two weekly magazines that were very, very similar and always fighting each other for that top position. Especially in the Packer years, and Paper Giants, for anyone that's seen that, brought that to life brilliantly. Nene King, legendary editor, but there was always this rivalry and always fierce competition and, great lengths gone to try and get one-upmanship on each other. And then during COVID, our companies came together. So those two magazines are suddenly, after being fierce rivals, sitting in the same office, in the same team, working together. And that was something I think everyone was a little bit apprehensive about. But, and I do believe potentially the year we've had something to do with that coming together a little bit more smoothly than we thought. I think we all realised there were bigger, competitors in life than each other, and see those mastheads sit together beautifully now and really have their own identity and still be strong, independent magazines is a great thing to see, because it is women and men on those titles that come together and collaborate rather than push against each other.
And kind of going back to that, I suppose, the empowerment that you've been given, and listening to your instinct, I suppose, all the changes that have occurred in your tenure, what, like in terms of COVID and the adaptations that had to take place and the constraints, what kind of creativity has come out of that for your team and for you?
Yeah, well, it was really surprising, I guess, like the rest of us, it seemed to happen pretty quickly, that we went from sitting in this office with a great support group of an IT and printers and production to us all at home in our bedrooms thinking, how do we put out a magazine? So that the first, challenge was that, and that was in a way a creativity of how do we, get around the obvious constraints of, not having each other and having all these support teams. So that was the first thing, and people that, I guess, potentially previously had fallen back on support groups or not been tech savvy had to quickly get up to speed. So that was our first hurdle. But beyond that, I guess, when we started to realise we couldn't go out and shoot people, so we do a lot of our stories are supported with photography. So we have, great photographers that go out and shoot, real people's stories or celebrities, and suddenly we couldn't do that. We had a magazine coming out, we had some great stories, but we had no visual representation. And that's when I think the designers really stepped up and really got creative, and it was about collage, it was about illustrations, it was about, they sort of said to me for the first time they had to really immerse themselves in the words and then understand, how do I bring that story to light without a photograph of the person. And it was, I think once we got through the difficulties of that first period, the creative director said to me it was really a great experience for them creatively to be pushed in that way and to have to think of, new ways to bring the magazine to life visually, which I think the magazine is richer for now, and we won't go back. We will still continue to use some of those elements of collage and illustration and, just that light and shade that perhaps we had got out of our system a little bit because we did rely so much on really good photography of people, and that isn't necessarily always what you need to get the best result. So that was interesting. And then on the other side, the journalism, we always used to say we had to interview people face to face because you get a much better result, we thought. You get people opening up more to you if you're sitting down rather than over the phone. And of course, during COVID, we couldn't sit down with people. So we kind of thought, well, we're going to have to do it over video or over phone. And what we found was, interestingly, some of our subjects were actually more, open and revealed more of themselves in that medium because perhaps they had that safety of being in their home and that safety of a screen between them. Also, I think the very nature of what we've all been through in the last year has made people a little bit more likely to share things, perhaps, when previously we were a little bit more protective of ourselves, or we had images that we were presenting to the world. And I think now we kind of realise maybe vulnerability or sharing those challenges in your life can actually be really strong and really powerful for people that are going through their own challenges. So we found, celebrities and the real people that we speak to have been really generous with their, with revealing, I guess, the truth of what they're going through to our readers.
Yeah, that reminds me, speaking of vulnerability, that cover of Deborah Hutton's, it's very raw, I suppose, unexpected image of her with her, post-operative scar from skin cancer. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was an interesting one because, again, normally I like to have the covers lined up for some months in advance, so we know a movie's coming out or we know a celebrity's, got a story to tell and we put them on the cover. But this year everything's been, up in the air, so I guess we were reacting, a little bit closer to the wire with what our covers were. And Deb Hutton, on top of everything that we've been through this year, ended up having a quite frightening skin cancer diagnosis and having to have surgery on her face and having quite a, confronting scar and surprised herself with how she felt about that and what that brought up for her, particularly as someone who used to be a model whose face is there living. And, her natural reaction said initially was just to hide herself away until it healed. And then she saw a picture of it and she thought, that's something that I think I need to share with people, because she was concerned that people were not getting skin checks because we're all in COVID and we're all at home. You let those kind of health things slip, and she really felt she wanted to tell people. And having been a previous editor on the weekly and, worked with us for many years, she sort of rang me straight away and said, I want to tell this story and I want to tell it with you. And I think we need to do it right now while this scar's still angry and while I'm still, full of this passion to tell my story. And so, we turned it around. I think I said to you that day we had to call a photographer and they jumped in their car and drove over. We did it at her house. She just had her own clothes. She had her own hair and makeup, so she felt really comfortable. And again, was just very generous with her story and very honest with, how it made her feel and what she went through. And, we put it on the cover and, it's not the normal cover. Normally for a weekly cover, we like smiles. We like, we like to be very controlling about the image. And this was a very, I guess in some ways confronting and honest image. And, I felt strongly about it, but you never know how it's going to be received. And yeah, it was one of the biggest sellers of the year, and the letters and phone calls were still coming in now on that cover, months later, from people who have said, I went and got checked and it's, turned out to help me make a very important decision that otherwise I wouldn't have made, and people's lives, changing, and just applauding her for that. I think it just brought people together in a different way. So yeah, it really hit the mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that vulnerability, and I think, through our discussions, like the subject matter of, of nostalgia, cooking, especially these kind of creature comforts that everybody seemingly got into, making cakes and things like that. How do you balance, like, I know that your intention was to bring some modernity to, what is nostalgic. How do you balance that And why do you think that has been so successful in lockdown for you guys?
I think even before lockdown, as you say, I knew that the Weekly's got a really strong support group of women that have read it, and it's been around for 85 plus years. But to me, coming to it, I realised it was the topics that were the most sort of, I think, the strongest stories that we told in every section of the magazine, whether it was food or whether it was politics or celebrity, were stories that related to women, no matter how old they were. And it's this terrible term that we throw around, age gnostic. And when we look at things now, it's like we don't want to tell a story that appeals to someone in their 20s or their 30s or their 40s or their 50s. We want to tell female stories that appeal across the generations. And that sounds obvious, but it's actually when you put everything through that lens, it makes it a lot easier to put together a good issue of the Weekly, in my opinion. And the same with food. It's something that we know traditionally maybe younger women were not baking their own bread or were not milling their own flour, but during COVID that came back around again, and we wanted a bit of that wholesome old school values, I guess. So that played right into the strengths of the Weekly, and I think really shone a light on the fact that knitting doesn't necessarily just have to be for your grandmother, and gardening can be something you get joy out of in your 20s as much as in your 80s, and that I guess unraveling of the traditional ideas about what hobbies you take in different ages of your life, or what interests you have, or how you dress, or what have you. I think we've thrown that all up in the air a bit now, and people can be true to what their interests are, and if they want to wear red lipstick and leather, you can do that in your 80s or your 20s. And I think the same can be said for what you cook and the stories that you read. So it's been great for us to be able to shake that up, and we've tried to do that in the kind of people that we cover in the magazine. So we've had Bindi Irwin on the cover in her early 20s. We've had Maggie Beer in her 80s. We've got the fact that you can have one magazine that can have that broad range of women on the cover and each time sell incredibly well, I think just proves that women can be drawn together by a lot more than just their age.
Yeah, I think that those key values of authenticity and truthfulness. I was talking to my wife about that you had mentioned those, and she was just like, just the recipes just work. Like that the recipes are going to work. That kind of trust. I mean, that's on a whole other level. You're trusting people with, or people are trusting you that they can go off and bake a cake. Tell us about Jacinda Ardern and her love of the Women's Weekly birthday cookbook.
Yes, we're big Jacinda Ardern fans, and we've been lucky enough to interview her a couple of times for the magazine. But we were thrilled when we saw her turning to the Women's Weekly kids cake book, as so many of us do, for her child's birthday. So she's made, I think, 2 now of the Women's Weekly cakes with great success, I might add. She's not bad in the kitchen. Yeah, and they're not easy. I've taken a couple of them on since I've worked here, and they are challenging. So hats off to her. But I think again, and that was such a great thing for every mothers to see everywhere, that you can be running a country, but you can still be that person putting together the bunny cake on at 10 o'clock at night, the night before your kid's birthday. And to me, that's that's wonderful to see.
I was going to ask you your legacy, like what would your ideal legacy be for?
Well, my legacy has always been to try and basically bring a new generation of people to this magazine, and I guess also to challenge some of the preconceived ideas about conservative Australia. Like I think the Weekly was pigeonholed as a conservative magazine, that didn't, I guess, challenge taboos, but I think that wasn't giving the readers enough credit, because they really have come with us on a lot of, journeys through same-sex marriage debate and through various different things that have happened in our history, and that will continue to. And I think that my legacy, I hope, will be to make sure there's another new generation of women that come in and pick up this magazine and see the strength of women and the strength of, Australian women.
Yeah, I think that's, through what I've read and just what I know, that you're kind of championing that, the struggle of, as I was saying is in your intro, you do it with a smile, and I'm amazed by almost every single one of my friends who are working mother. In terms of your personal, what you've discovered in the unexpected? What are some of the things from having to juggle all that stuff for you personally?
I guess the biggest thing, and this is not anything new because I think most working mums would tell you this, is you don't waste time anymore. You kind of, it's made me better at making decisions, and that's, as I've progressed in my career, that's become more and more important. And I think, to be a good leader, one of the most important things is to be able to make a decision, make it quickly, and then bring people along the ride with you. And I think, when you realize you want to be home, to put your daughter to bed at least 3 nights a week, you want to be able to do, exercise, you want to be able to see your friends. If I don't make a decision quickly, if we procrastinate and we go off in the different directions, it just takes a lot longer to get things done. So to be honest, it's made me really, work on that skill of making a decision really quickly, gathering the facts, making the decision and moving through it and getting it done. And, that's been great for me because I previously was a massive procrastinator. I was someone that would, cramming things, doing them at the last minute, second guessing, changing my mind. And a lot of editors, could be guilty of that. You come in and you want to start everything again because you've had a new idea. Now it's like I just try and have the right idea the first time and execute it really well and move through it as quickly as I can.
I mean, you not only edit the Australian Women's Weekly, you also edit Better Homes and Gardens. So I think, isn't the saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person? You sound very busy.
Well, I'm not the editor of Better Homes and Gardens. They've got a fabulous editor, but I have taken on a publishing responsibility with a couple of other magazines, right. And that came out through COVID. So again, our company merged with another company, and we had a few new mastheads and new editors coming in, and it's been really great to, I guess, get my head around a different brand, another huge brand that has great, recall in this country, and again, a brand that's got TV, it's got a massive digital following, and it's got a shop, an e-commerce site as well, which is really interesting. So that's been it's been really good. And as I said, when I took over the job at the Weekly, I thought this job's too big for me. And then, who'd have thought a few years later you're taking on that and more, and it all seems achievable because we just do it. You just, as I said, you take on things as they come, and give it your best shot.
Well, I think that's a good note to finish on. We just do it. We could go on for another hour at least, Nicole, but thank you so much for your time. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of inspired people, not just women, after your fireside chat. So thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.